Tucker, thanks for having me.
All right. You all set?
Okay. So, let's get to the first slide here. So, agriculture in California. We've all heard California is the breadbasket of the world. Have you ever heard of the saying, ag runs Wall Street? Because everything in ag, from the jeans that you're wearing to the coffee that you're drinking, all of this stuff comes from ag. There's some really good numbers up here. 138 billion economical impact. The fact that we have over 400 crops that we grow here in California. Some basic stuff right here. California accounts for 2/3 of the U.S. fruit and nut production, 1/3 of vegetables. 1 out of every 5 gallons of milk comes from California. If you add in almond milk, the number goes up. California, we are the largest ag state in the country, in the world, and it's a proud heritage that we hold, and sometimes people kind of lose sight of that and get caught up in other things. So there's some 4 basic things I'm going to get into today, just to kind of give you guys a brief overview, and then I believe when we get to the end, Roger's got a couple questions for me. So one of the big topics, high cost. Farmers are nuts and bolts kind of guys. They like to be able to go out, they like to get hands-on, they like to be able to fix it. These guys are freaked out by things like sensors that they don't understand how to fix. And we do have farmers that do. We have farmers with all kinds of different backgrounds. But if you get out in the field, they're like, how come I can't just go turn a knob and turn the water on, Devon? What's going on? Why do I need all of this stuff? Because that's the way they've been doing it for generations. So to people who this is their culture, this is how they've been doing it, they don't see anything wrong with it because that's just the way it is. And when it comes to the tech side, we've got to talk to them. We got to be this guy. We got to break it down. Because that's why we're here. We're here to talk about ag, and we're here to talk about tech and bringing it together so that way the guy out in the field can understand the scientist and the tech side of it, because there's a lot of room for improvement. There is room for growth. The data variables alone and the ability that we're able to do things in a modern age and get with the 21st century is huge. You're talking increased profit, yields, and several other things we're going to get into here in just a sec. So increased competition. Why did he put a risk board up here? Because there's risk. Everything we do in business, there's risk. Everything we do in ag, there's risk. Anytime we change the way and the culture of agriculture, there's a risk. And one of the great places to go is back in my home district in Tulare is the World Ag Expo. It's the second week of February every year. If you haven't gone, you're missing out. On average, there's over 65 countries there. And we have competition amongst countries on who's growing what commodities. If you want to look at some really fun numbers, just look at the dairy markets. But you also have competition amongst the states. Every time I'm here, you've got this idea, and especially here in California, we have this idea that, well, I can get beef from Texas. I can get apples from Washington. I can get milk from Idaho or Nebraska. I can get other things outside of California. Why do we have to have agriculture in California? Because California in the San Joaquin Valley has the only climate of its kind in the world where we're able to grow over 400 different types of commodities. Uh-oh. Let's go back here.
Our quest to understand California's drought has taken us across the state, from threatened wildlife habitats to city centers. But no place has been hit harder than a community of farm workers in East Porterville. East Porterville in the Central Valley is ground zero for the California drought.
So Porterville is my hometown. Roger mentioned I did 2 tours in Iraq. When you come home from a war and your hometown's like a third world country, you know we got some problems. It's just simple as that. And the tech side of things is able to fix some of this stuff, is able to use the water better, is able to help my friends and neighbors out. And we shouldn't have these kind of problems, especially in the state of California. I mean, we all brag all the time, California could break away. We're the 8th largest, we're the 7th largest, we're the 5th largest economy in the world. Here we are, third world conditions. There's a problem. And I mean, the drought, to go into it, I'd have to do like a 3-day seminar with you all to just break it down. I mean, because you've got things from snowpack to watershed to storage to, just the simple fact, the state water infrastructure is built off of flood management practices, not off of water storage and water recharge. The system's not even built for what we need it for in today's society. So there's a problem. And there's solutions out there, and I know there's a lot of people in this room, I see heads shaking, that understand that and understand paths forward. And I'd love to work with you all on that. Increased cost to do business in California. Again, California's we're the number 1, right? Number 1 regulated state in the country. There's a saying, there's a mentality, this isn't my quote, there's a mentality that if it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. If it stops, subsidize it. Welcome to California. $15 minimum wage, ag overtime, my personal favorite, the gas and diesel tax. I drive a diesel truck. So, and just the regulation. Everything across the board is regulated. Our air is regulated. Our water is being regulated. How we grow things is regulated. The amount of plant nutrition is regulated. The amounts of every little tiny thing we do, there's a regulation for it. And if there's not, I guarantee you one of my colleagues under the dome in Sacramento is more than willing to write a bill to regulate it and to tax it and slap a fee on it. Why? Because it's California. And it's just crazy. But at the same time, there's this kind of crazy net benefit. There's this program called California Grown. And people like to know that their food is clean. That they like to know where it came from. I know there's companies out there that track from where things were grown, what was gone into the soil, all the way up, just so the consumer can have the ability to track that, and people want it on their smartphone, on their app, so when they know this is exactly what I'm getting, here's where it came from, here's the type of fertilizer they used, here's the water, here's the climate when it was grown. We're in the day and age of technology. People want it. They thirst for it. And so what's really cool is we have this California Grown program where California is setting up a label. So if it's California Grown, we're going to put that label on there so people know that it came from the highest regulated state and that food is safe and the quality is the best in the world. Tech to the rescue. This is where you guys come in. Water management. I know farmers that use apps on their cell phones and use microjets through irrigation to put fertilizer directly to the root systems in their trees. It's pretty cool. You go talk to their dads and they think it's sci-fi. They don't understand it. But it is the future of ag. To be able to use every precise drop to get the best yield, the most production, these are the things that we need. And that's what's happening. Genetic engineering, automation, optimization, GMOs. It's this big, crazy, taboo word. If you don't want this, and you want this, you need to be smart about what you're doing and smart about the science. If we're going to grow enough food to meet growth projections of human population that say in the year 2050 population is going to double, This is the only way. Some may argue, but this increases so much and ensures that we don't have to use things like pesticides and other things and other practices that people don't like. Coachella. So during spring break, I got to take some of my staff down to Coachella. Not that Coachella. So I do a lot of these tours where I go around the state. I feel, being the vice chairman of Ag, that I should go around, I should talk to the guys on the ground. And in Coachella, they have a very, very unique system where they monitor every single drop of water that comes in from the Colorado River into their system, into their aquifer, and back out. And if you talk to the director of the Coachella Water District, he will tell you accountability, accountability, accountability. And they do this through the sensor technology. They do these things by collecting all the data, by having the computer system. I mean, this guy has a motherboard where they can control all these flows from a computer at will. And it's amazing and it's fascinating. And what's really neat is this is old technology that they're doing it with. I mean, the future is the guy that's managing this will be able to do it from his phone at home. Other things, optimizing irrigation systems. We talked about this a little bit more. I'm sure there's people going to be talking about drip irrigation, micro irrigation, making sure you have the right amount of water to hit, drought durability, cutting costs. So, automation, optimization, AI, big data. We just talked about earlier about ag worker overtime, the problem with making sure there's enough people to work. I read these things, I see these things, these videos where, you guys are coming up with stuff where the sensors are so precise you can run a machine through and pick strawberries without damaging the fruit. Instead of having these labor-intensive crops no longer are labor-intensive. But then the question is what's the cost on the machine to do it? That optimizes everything. Big data, AI. Every variable that we can calculate in, and you see a lot of this with irrigation techniques that are developing, we have the ability to measure how much water is in the soil. We have the ability to tell what the root health is, what the roots need on these root systems in a lot of our trees and our orchards. We have the ability to determine exactly how much plant nutrients we need to put in. We're measuring the humidity in the air. We're measuring the temperature, atmospheric pressure. I mean, you name it, there's a sensor for it now. So what does that mean? That means algorithms where instead of having to manually go out into the field, you can have a system that'll do it on its own. You can have systems where farmers can spend more time at home with their kids and out doing other things and growing more food instead of being stuck driving around out in the dirt making sure they're turning on water. Questions? You got questions, I got answers. You may not like them.
Well, let me kick this off. So, Devon, I want to focus on one of the things. I know that you've given a lot of thought to this water situation, and you're from the Central Valley. So I guess my question is the drought over? And the reason I ask is there's a lot of companies here that have developed technologies for water conservation and preservation and precision agriculture that really were focused on solving these drought problems. But we've had a pretty wet year, so was that obsolete already?
The drought by no means is over. You can look back in recent history. We had a wet year in 2009, and then we went into 6 more years of drought. If you go with looking at the Sierras, we have record amount of snowpack this year, but it's melting. Again, we don't have a water infrastructure in the state that's designed for storage. It's designed for flood management. So until the state infrastructure changes, we're still going to have droughts. Until state policies and regulations change, I mean, in this year alone, we sent enough water to do every type of production, to drinking, for everything in California. 11 years worth of water has gone out the bay this year because we don't have the infrastructure to capture it the right way. And because we're basing our methods on flood instead of storage. So the drought is by no means over. And there's always going to be another one. So if you're working on drought stuff, please continue, because it's very, very much needed.
Any questions from our audience here? Right here in front. Roger?
Roger Grace Associates. I'm delighted that you use the word censor so many times. Talking about water, what is going on in the state to monitor the pollution levels of water as a result of the runoff of the nutrients that's put onto the fields that irrigation is also supporting?
Okay, let me repeat the question. So the question is, what's being done in the state to monitor water quality, in effect, and especially the runoff from agricultural operations?
So there are several different things. I mean, these guys go out and do, and I'm not probably the subject matter expert specifically on that. There's talk amongst the legislature on looking at groundwater quality and purity. A lot of legislation that I run is, you know, we saw the slide on Porterville, making sure people have the ability to get water out of the ground. There's people that live in the state, believe it or not, that are still on well water at home, and part of that is making sure they're able to pump the water out and that the water's clean. There's several factors, though, that go into the quality of water. I mean, you have naturally causing factors. I mean, you have chromium-6 coming out of the Colorado River water down in Coachella that they deal with. You have naturally causing uranium deposits off the watershed from the granite in the Sierra Nevadas that people don't like to talk about. I mean, it's really easy to go and look at the farmer and go, yeah, you use nitrates for fertilizer, you're the bad guy. There's so many naturally causing factors, naturally causing arsenic. There's 101 things going on, and you really have to look at it holistically to understand what the factors are. You know, I know there's some state guys coming up later on that might be able to address specifically what they're doing. I know the State Water Resources Control Board's looking at several different measures right now, and there's a lot of talk, but I haven't seen anything fully work into a bill yet.
So, Devon, you know, over the last few years, I've heard that farmers have they've relied on groundwater, so they've had to go deeper and deeper and deeper, and the water gets very briny as you get down. Have you seen some technologies that are dealing with that are maybe filtering or improving water access for ag operations?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you drive around in the valley, and you know, you hear a lot of talk about subsidence and about how farmers are the bad guy because they're sucking all the water out of the ground. But you have to remember, a lot of these guys have water rights that are over 100 years old, and they haven't been getting those water allocations. So in wet years, you typically get water down into the Central Valley. You know, we used to do flood irrigation that used to recharge the aquifers. We've changed our practices to better use every drop. Well, that water's not getting down into the aquifer, it's going up into the root system and is food on your table. So, as far as the technology side, farmers have been forced to go deeper and deeper. Well, when you get deeper, Roger, absolutely right, the water quality is not so good. I mean, you're hitting like prehistoric water tables at some things. So you'll drive around and you'll see water filtration systems out there because these guys are forced to clean the water before they put it on the plants because it'll kill the plants. And again, this is that third world conditions that we shouldn't be in because we have an abundance of water if we'd be able to capture it and change the water infrastructure of the state so we're doing storage instead of flood management.
Steve, you had a question.
Yeah, Devon. Steve McShane. I own a fertilizer company, a nursery operation, and I'm on the city council in the city of Salinas. Tell us a little bit more about the state legislature, and don't focus on the regulatory and the negative, but when it comes to support for innovation and entrepreneurship, whether that be technology transfer from the University of California, grants, support for accelerators. I used to think of the legislature as a bunch of old white dudes, and you're clearly not that. You're on it, and I want to get a better picture for how in tune your colleagues are for what we're talking about and trying to do here.
Okay, the question is, what is the state legislature doing to support and encourage innovation and entrepreneurship, especially in agricultural solutions, I think?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of times people think in their heads, you know, state legislature is a bunch of, what do they call it, pale, frail, white, pasty guys. That's not the case. I'm 34 years old. I'm an Iraq vet. I did 2 tours of combat. I turned 21 over there. Got blown up twice, came home, went through college, ran for office, and say la vie, I'm in front of you today. We have a millennial caucus. We have a tech caucus. We're talking about how we can make sure the overregulations of California don't infringe upon new technologies as they're being developed. That's a huge, huge concern in the younger generation of legislatures. I mean, in the state assembly, there are 80 members. I make up 1. Each assembly member represents about 500,000 people. State Senate, there's 40. They represent about 1 million people. So you have a vast diversity of people all across the state, but a lot of the things we talk about are how do we use the technology to better do these things? How do we make sure that as new technologies are coming out, we're not infringing upon that growth to better our society? You know, these things get, I mean, I can go on and on and on. I don't think we have time for it today, but it's so imperative, especially in the 21st century. I mean, some of my colleagues and I, you know, we talk about how we're moving into the future, and we have millennials who are stuck at home living on the couch of mom and dad, and they're living by grandpa and grandpa's rules. We have a problem. So there's definitely talk, there's definitely movement to keep things moving forward into the newer, modern age of the 21st century where tech is primarily where things are going.
Time for one more question. Right over here.
Yeah, I've got a question on scale. It seems like we run across great... Hi, my name is Chris Carlson. My question is on scale. We see great technologies, we see these showcase farms, but we don't see the scale. How does this get, is it a lack of system integrators? How and when is this going to get more widespread, and what do you see that path?
So, that's a great question. And this is one of those times where I say, I don't know. My scope of practice is the state legislature, laws and legislation, things that are happening on there. So is the scale, I mean, that kind of comes to sharing information. That comes to what are you know, what's the guy next to you doing? Are they sharing the data that they're getting? Or are they nuzzling that idea so tight that they don't share it? I mean, there's, in the school of thought that I see is, you know, when we have ideas, we're like, this idea is my baby and I'm going to hold it tight. Sometimes we hold it so tight we kill it. Because there's also a saying that it takes a village to raise a child. So when we have these new and up-and-coming things, we need to look to our friends who are doing similar things and build off each other so that idea can actually take root and evolve and grow and run and become the future. So we can actually have this scale, so we know what the measurements are, so we know all of these things. I wish I could give you more than that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Devon. Thank you, audience, for your questions.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. You killed it.
Thanks, guys.